Good evening. My name is Charlie Bailey. I am an alumnus from McMurray University. I am a financial advisor in the Midland, Odessa area in Texas. And McMurray and the Director of Alumni Relations, Suzanne Couch, has asked me to come in and speak on managing debt and finances after college. Based on a survey that was sent out to alumni or alumnus that were participating or graduating college from 2003 to up until the end of last year, overwhelming response was that they wanted to have a webinar or a speech given on finances and debt and what that looks like after college. So I have been asked to come in and give my 2 cents, or you could say expertise, tell my story, and hopefully this helps. This is going to be the first of many webinars. And so a little bit about me before we get started. I graduated with my beautiful wife, Katie Bailey, in 2008, fall of '08. We went to McMurray from 2004 up until then. I was very involved there. I was a resident assistant. We both helped with the religious life. We both served on CAB. I was in Kosari. She was in Gamma Sigma, and we really enjoyed our time there, and we loved every minute of it. We now live in the Midland area. We are expecting our first child in October. We'll find out in June if it's a boy or girl. I'm not picky as long as they're healthy. So that's a little bit about us. A lot of the stuff that we were covering today, my wife and I have done ourselves. So I'm not telling you anything that we're not already doing already. And so, like I said, hopefully this helps. So we're going to go ahead and get started. There's going to be a slide presentation that accompanies this webinar. So you'll be able to print those out and go through them. I have those here that I'm going to be referencing and talking about. But like I said, I hope this helps. So we'll go ahead and get started. The first thing that I want to talk about is an emergency fund. And an emergency fund is there just for, like I said, what it is for. It's emergencies. It's in case something happens to you, you want to be able to have excess ready cash available to help with your emergency. It's only an emergency when you don't have the money. That's the bottom line. It's only an emergency when you don't have the money. People ask, when should I start building my emergency fund? I would tell you today. Don't wait till tomorrow or next week or 10 years from now. Today is when you need to start building your emergency fund. People ask me, well, how much should I have in my emergency fund? I would tell you 3 to 6 months of living expenses. So I like six months of living expenses, and that's the step that my wife and I are on currently. And the reason why I like 6 months is if you were to lose your job, worst case scenario, you lost your job, it could take you several months to get a new one. And during that time, if you don't have cash readily available to help you during this, to pay the bills, you're going to either have to put on a credit card, which is going to charge you a high amount of interest. You're going to have to take out a loan from the bank that's going to charge you interest, or you're going to have to borrow it from friends or family. And I can tell you, Thanksgiving dinner and Christmas meals are not as enjoyable whenever you owe your family or friends money. I'll tell you that. And so you want to have that cash in case something happens to you. Maybe you don't lose your job. Maybe the hot water heater breaks or your car explodes and you need some money to help you take care of those expenses. The cash and having that on hand will help you do that. An emergency happens only whenever you don't have the money. And when I say that, if you have $15,000 in the bank and your car needs 4 new tires, and that's $1,000 to get those 4 new tires, it's not an emergency because you have $15,000 in the bank. You just write the check. It's only an emergency when you don't have the money in place. And so, like I said, I like the 6 months of emergency cash. It could be 3 to 6 months, but I would tell you that you need to start working on that and now and getting that in place, because at some point the statistics show within the next 18 months you're going to have some type of emergency. Now, That could be a $10,000 emergency. It could be a $500 emergency, but you're going to have an emergency. And if you're listening to this and you're married and you have kids, then you know what I'm talking about, even more so, because your kids could have an emergency. One could break their arm and on the playground. Medical bills are not cheap, and going to the doctor is not inexpensive. So you want to make sure you have that money available in case something happens. I have an example. So let's say people say, how much should I have? And that depends on what your income needs are, or your monthly living expenses. So you take your monthly living requirements and minus your taxes. So in this example, it's $5,000. And then take the amount of time that you could possibly be laid off, or if there's a big emergency, you multiply that by 6 months, and that's where you get $30,000. That's how much you would need in cash. In my market in Midland, Odessa, it's very easy to find a job. I mean, they pay McDonald's employees up to $14 an hour starting, and they shuttle you back and forth to work. It's kind of ridiculous. But we have the lowest unemployment in the nation. It's very easy to find another job here, whereas if you are in the Midwest or another state and you're still feeling the effects of the recession, it might not be as easy to find another job if you were to indeed get laid off. And so that's where that 6 months gives you peace of mind and allows you to breathe if there is an emergency or something happens. Also for myself, I work off of commissions, and so my months fluctuate. I don't have a set salary, so sometimes as we were building this and we were getting out of debt, having that emergency fund definitely helped in those leaner months during that time. So the other question I have is, should I invest this money in your emergency fund? And I would say no, you should not. You want to have that cash, liquid, available, and easy to access. You're not trying to hit home runs in investments at this point. You're just happy bunting and keeping that money safe and liquid. I'm like you guys. I am not happy with interest rates the way they are. I know our bank account pays 0.10 on our checking account, and in our savings account it pays 0.25. That's not going to make me rich. That is for sure. But that's okay, because this money, like I said, is only for emergencies. You want to be able to get to it. You don't want to lock it into anything that you're going to have to pay a penalty on. You also don't want to have a certain maturity that you can't touch it without paying a penalty. So this solely needs to be in cash in case you need it and you need to get to it. If you have it in your safe, that's okay too. I would say that you want in your bank to make a little bit. It's not much. But also, wherever you have it, do not lock it in for a long time, because your emergencies, they don't care what your financial plans are, and they come at any time. And so being prepared for those would definitely help you now and in the long run. So I'm going to move on from emergency fund to getting out of debt. I hear, isn't debt a normal thing? Unfortunately, the answer is yes. The average household in the United States is carrying $15,191 in credit card debt. Their average mortgage balance is $154,365, and the average student loan is $33,607. But I would say, do you want to be normal with your finances? I would say educationally, you're already abnormal because you have a college degree. If you have a bachelor's degree, you're one of the 31% of the population that actually have a bachelor's degree. So you're already abnormal educationally. Well, why don't you be abnormal with your finances as well? And even if you have your master's or your doctorate, those percentages go even farther down. And so I don't want to be normal with my finances. Most people stink at money. That's just the way it is. If your parents stink at money, you probably stink at money. That's one of those topics that you don't sit over the dinner table and ask your dad how his 401k is doing, or he doesn't ask you how it's doing. I know from my situation and my family growing up, my parents fought all the time. We had clothes, food, and shelter, but that was it. I started working when I was 12, and sometimes my mom asked me for money because they didn't have enough. And so finances is one of those things that is very is very private, and a lot of people don't like to talk about it, and probably for good reason. If they're up to their ears in debt and they're trying to keep up with the Joneses, they don't want that secret out that they don't have it all together and not everything's paid for. So the good thing is you can change that. You can be abnormal. You can get out of a mountain of debt depending on your intensity and how bad you want it. So the first thing you have to do is tackle the mess. You have to look at how much debt do you have. A good thing to do is to look at every single debt that you owe, look at the balance that you have on it, look at what your interest payments are on it, and look at what your monthly payments are. That's the first thing you have to do. You have to look at the mess. What do you owe in a debt to anywhere? I mean, it could be Blockbuster. Blockbuster's out of business now, but it could be an old friend from college that you owe money. You look at all your debts and what you can. There's two schools of thought on how you pay off this debt. Dave Ramsey, who is a financial guru out of Nashville, Tennessee, he is one of those guys that just talks about common sense, and what I have found in my short, brief life, that common sense isn't very common anymore. Neither is common courtesy, but he talks about the debt snowball. So that's this first technique. What you do is you take, you list your debts from the smallest amount to the largest. So let's say you have $1,000 on credit cards, you have $5,000 balance on your car, you have $10,000 on student loans. That's hypothetical numbers. What he would say is you pay the smallest debt first, you pay that off first, and what you do is you pay the minimums on your other debts while you're putting as much money as you can to that smallest debt until that smallest debt is paid off. Once that is done, then you move on to the next debt, and you pay as much as you can on that debt with any extra money that you have, while you're still paying the minimums on the larger debts. And so what you do is, in a sense, a snowball. A snowball, once it starts rolling down the hill, it gets more minimum, it gets faster, it gains and builds and builds. Same thing with a snowball debt strategy is you're paying off that smallest one so you could gain momentum and then start putting more money towards the next debt and so on and so forth. The other school of thought is the same principle, only with interest rates. So you take your smallest interest rate, or I'm sorry, your largest interest rate, and pay that off. You pay the minimums on all your other debts while you're tackling that largest interest rate. And then once that is paid off, you tackle the next largest, and then so on and so forth until those are all paid off. Either way you go, it's going to help you get to your goal. Me personally, my wife and I, we did the debt snowball. We tackled the smallest debt first, and like I alluded to earlier, we have been able to pay off a chunk of money. Actually, we paid off over $75,000 within a 3-year period, and that was between student loans, car payments, credit cards, a consumer loan. We had a lot of mess, but we tackled it, and each month we'd put as much money to the smallest debt, and then you go from there. Some people ask me, should you build up that emergency fund first before you start paying off on your debts? And me personally, and this is what Dave Ramsey would say, is build your baby emergency fund first. We have to have some type of emergency money in place, but I would say doing $1,000 in a baby emergency fund, then tackle your debt, and then go back to building up the rest of your emergency fund. And that's what my wife and I did. We put $1,000 into a baby emergency fund in case we needed it, and then we tackled everything we could for debt. Now that the debt is paid off, except our house, now we're building our 6 months of emergency fund to be fully funded, and then we're going to look at saving for retirement investments. I'm a financial guy. I look at numbers all the time. I see rates of return and what I might be losing out on over time by paying my debt off early. Some people say, well, if you can make money on your investments and you make, let's say, 7%, and your interest rates on your debts are only 5%, you're making more money on the spread. That is true, but you're assuming that you're continuing going to get 7% over time no matter what, whereas your debt you're paying a guaranteed interest rate on that from your creditor. And the debts, you don't. You hear people say, "Well, I own my home, or I'm buying my car, or I'm financing my car." You don't own any of those things until you have the piece of paper that says it's free and clear from the bank. For instance, my home. If Wells Fargo wanted to repo my home for whatever reason, they can. I mean, I'm sure I have some legal recourse in there somewhere, but they can come to me and say, "Hey, we some stuff's happened, and we're going to foreclose on your house," and there's nothing I can do about it. I don't own it. Whereas my vehicle, I own. And that's the thing about getting out of debt. In Proverbs, it says the borrower is slave to the lender, and until you pay off all your debts, you still owe someone else, and that's not a spot that you want to be in. I mean, right now, I know just getting out of college and having student loans that you're going to have that for a little bit, but depending on how intense you are, you can get out of it very quickly. It kind of went on a little tangent there. Sorry about that. How long would this take? That depends on your intensity. I would say hopefully everything that you have is besides your house is paid off in less than 3 years. But if it takes longer, you just got to push through it. You just keep on going. Because the faster you get out of debt, the faster you can start building wealth for you and your family. You need to make a budget with your spouse. You need to make sure that you are on the same page. Unfortunately, money is cited as the #1 cause for divorce in the United States. And you need to make sure that you're both on the same page. Dave Ramsey says that typically there's a free spirit and there's a nerd. When my wife and I first got together, I was the nerd, still am, and my wife was the free spirit. And she has slowly, through many budget talks and tears and arguments, she's becoming more and more of a nerd. But you have to be on the same page. I would say for your budget, the best way to get started is take out your bank statement or your credit card statement and go through and look line by line where you're spending money. How much you're spending on groceries, how much you're spending on gas, how much you're spending on entertainment, how much you're spending on whatever it is, miscellaneous income. You can see where your money's going, and then you can realize that, are we spending too much money on Starbucks coffee? Are we spending too much money on our cable bill? And you can see what's a necessity, or you can see what's a want. And that's the difference between getting out of debt and staying in a debt. Most people say, well, I just want to enjoy it now. I don't know how long I'm going to live. But if you live like no one else now, you can live like no one else later. When you're retiring 10 years before all your friends do, or you're retiring and able to travel the world while your friends are still working because they're still paying off debts, then you're going to be in a lot better place. The budget, when you budget, try to go to a neutral location to do this. Go to Starbucks or go somewhere outside the house. So you try to make it as a fun environment as you can. Budgeting is not the most fun to do, but it's a necessity. You have to do it, and you have to have a plan in place in order to win. Last thing on getting out of debt, and if you want to get out of debt very quickly, start using cash instead of debit or credit cards. My wife and I are still working on this, and I know if we would have used cash the last several years, we'd have our emergency fund done, and even more so, we have more in our investment accounts. We haven't done that, but using cash instead of debit or credit cards, they've done studies that it physically pains you to use cash instead of debit or credit cards. If you have $20 in your pocket, or $100 for that matter, and you go to the grocery store, you probably are going to use your debit card before you use cash. And I know this personally, because that's how it works with me. If I have cash, I'm going to use my debit card. Because it hurts me to use cash, and studies have shown that. So if you want to be intense about getting out of debt, move everything to cash. And then also the thing about cash, you can't overspend with cash. You have your allotted budget, you have it in your envelopes or however you like to do it. You can't spend more than what you've taken out of the bank because you can't overdraft with cash. And so if you're really intense about it and getting out of debt, you can do that, and cash is definitely a way to help. I'm going to go ahead and move on to saving for retirement. I have the question all the time from clients, how much should I save? That depends on what you want retirement to look like. Every client's different. Everybody has their own financial goals. I have some clients that want to spend $10,000 a month in retirement and spend $25,000 on travel a year. I have other clients that want to spend $2,000 a month. Maybe you're single, maybe you're married. It just depends on what you want your lifestyle to be. I have some clients that want to retire at 50. I have some clients that want to retire at 75. I have a young client that came in the other day. He's 35. He's been saving since he was 18. And look at the numbers. He can retire at 42 based on what he wants to spend. Now, he's not going to retire at 42, but he can if he wanted to. So it all depends on what you want to have your retirement look like. I tell everybody, it doesn't say anywhere in the Bible you're supposed to retire. I don't know where it's at. But if you want to retire, you better have money. That's all I can say. You better have assets. I love what I do. I feel blessed to be able to do what I do every day, and hopefully I can do this until I'm 80 years old. But if I want to retire at 50 or 60, I better have assets, and I better put money back now to be able to do that. And same thing with you. If you want to retire early, or if you want to retire at any point, you better have money. You might work until you're 100. There's a few people that work at Walmart that are millionaires, but they have the option because they have built up financial security, and if they want to work at Walmart, that's great, but they're not being forced to work at Walmart. A good rule to start with is saving 15% of your earned income is a good percentage to put back into your 401ks through work, and we'll talk about that in a minute, or individual retirement accounts, or even joint accounts. You got to start saving, and I would say this step is after you get out of debt, after you build your emergency fund, then you start saving 15% of your income. People ask me, what investment should I pick? Well, that depends on how risky you are. Typically, if you're younger, you generally take on more risk, but really that depends on you. I would say, especially with retirement, it's a very good idea to seek out a financial planner or a financial advisor that you trust, that is honest, and that is willing to educate you on investments, because you need to make sure that you know what you're investing in. That way you can have a better understanding of where you're putting your money, how you pay, all of that stuff. If you have somebody that you want to talk to and they don't explain everything in detail, I would not use them as an advisor or as a planner. You can definitely do it yourself. There are a lot of good companies that allow you to do it yourself. There's a lot of good planning tools that you can look at, and even financial calculators. Maybe you don't want to do an advisor and you're not ready to save, you just want to look at some retirement calculations. There's 2 websites that I use that are outside of my company's internal softwares that I use. One of those is www.dinkytown.com. Dinky, D-I-N-K-Y, and town, T-O-W-N, that's one word. Dinkytown.com has a lot of good financial calculators. And then Kiplinger, Kiplinger.com is another good resource to be able to just look at calculations based on what you think you might need in retirement, with inflation, with taxes, with a decent rate of return. What does that look like over time? I would tell you, the sooner you start, the better. Compound interest, it's amazing. Like I referred to that client earlier, he started early and now he's able to retire early. The longer you wait, the more money you're going to have to put back. I have clients that walk in my office at 50 years old, 55, they want to retire in 10 years, and they say, well, how much do I need? We run the calculations. I say, well, you only need to put back $4,000. And they say, a year? I say, a month. You got to put back $4,000 a month to reach your goals. And unfortunately, that's part of my job that I hate the most, is showing people that they're either going to have to work longer or they're going to have to spend less in their retirement. And they've been working for 50 years. Most of the time, you don't want to have to spend less in retirement unless you're forced to do so. And that's why, by starting early, having a good plan and investing in good, solid companies over time will help you get to your goals. Some people ask me, what should I invest the money in? Good long-term investments. If you're trying to time the market, if you're trying to beat the market and buy the right days, good luck. if you could do that, I want you to call me and let me know how that's going. I would tell you, if you invested 20 years ago in the S&P 500 and left it alone, which the S&P 500 is a broad index of stocks, you would have done about 8.2, 8.4% return over that period. The average investor, the do-it-yourselfer that's trying to beat the market, did 4.1 to 4.2%. That's half of what the long-term average was. And the reason why is because your emotions get in the way. I tell people I'm a financial advisor, but the other thing I like to say is I'm a financial psychologist. It's easy to invest whenever the market's going up and when companies are making money. It's harder to invest when the market's going down, your friends are getting out, everybody on the news says this time is different and you need to sell all your investments. At that point, it's a very good time to be getting into the market. And that goes back to, that's why you have your emergency fund in place. That's why you're debt-free before you start this step of savings, because then if your investments go down, you're not concerned about it losing money for a 6-month period if your investment time horizon is 40 years. And that's what you have to look at is you're investing today, and we have to make sure that what you're buying today is working. But also, you're investing for 40 years. What's it look like then? And that's what I tell my clients. That's what I'm really looking forward to is what is the market at 20, 30, 40 years from now. So moving forward, there are several different options that you have to invest in. And so we're going to talk a little bit about each one of these. I'm not going to go into great detail into all these just because we don't have the time to do that today. But I would tell you to go to irs.gov and you can look at the specifics on the different saving and investment vehicles and what you can invest in. Also, with your financial planner or financial advisor that you meet up with, and they should have all the ins and outs of these. So like I said, I'm just going to hit the high points, but I think it's still very good information. So first we're going to talk about a traditional IRA. A traditional IRA, it stands for Individual Retirement Account. This is an account that, as an individual, you're allowed to put back up to $5,500 a year into. This account, you are able to write that $5,500 off your taxes, depending on how much you make. The IRS has some laws. If you make over a certain amount and you're employed by an employee-sponsored plan or an employer-sponsored plan, you cannot deduct it. So that goes back to talking to your planner, talking to your financial advisor, or doing some research on your own to see if you're eligible to deduct it. But you are able to deduct it if you fall into the certain criteria. This is also an account that grows tax deferred. So you will pay taxes on this money when you're 59 and a half or older. That's when you could legally take it out and not have to pay a 10% penalty. So if you take it out early and you don't meet one of the exception rules, you have to pay ordinary income tax plus 10%. This goes back to why we want to have emergency money, because you don't want to have to touch your investments, especially when the market's down, pay ordinary income plus the 10% loss. You could be losing a chunk of money, and then that doesn't make up for the emergency that you had in the first place. So traditional IRA allows you to put money back, write it off your taxes if you're eligible, and it grows tax deferred. With all these investment accounts that we're talking about, there is no fixed rate of return. You could buy stocks, bonds, annuities. You can buy several different investments inside the retirement account. It's just an account that helps you for retirement, and depending on the tax implications, that's what really is the difference between these accounts that we're talking about. Investment-wise, you get to decide on what you're buying inside that account. Excuse me. The next one is a Roth IRA. This is an account that you put money in that grows tax-free, and you're allowed to take it out when you retire, and you don't have to pay any taxes. So if you put money, this is an after-tax account, so you don't get a write-off now, but anything that this money grows to over time, you don't have to pay any taxes down the road. So let's say you built up this account to $2 million by the time you retire at 59 and a half, then you don't have to pay any penalties or taxes or anything on any of that growth whatsoever. You can take your $2 million out when you turn 59 and a half. You don't owe the government a dime. Also, I like this. this plan, if you're eligible, that goes back to looking at the IRS website and talking to your financial planner or financial advisor. Based on how much you make, the IRS says you can or you can't contribute to a Roth. There are some ways around that, but I think taxes are going to go up over time, not go down. So if you don't need the tax benefit now and writing it off and you're eligible, this is a great way to build wealth and then all of it be tax-free down the road. Also, one other side note to a Roth, the contributions that you put in, let's say you put in $10,000 and you need that money, your emergency fund's not where it should be, or you have a bigger emergency than you thought, you can take contributions out of your Roth tax and penalty-free at any point. I'll repeat that again. You can take them out at any point, tax and penalty-free. The difference between the traditional and the Roth is on the Roth side of it, it's tax and penalty-free on the contributions. On the earnings, you still have to pay taxes and a penalty on the earnings. So you put in $10,000, it grows to $25,000. The $10,000 will be tax and penalty free if you take it out. The $15,000 of growth, you still have to pay ordinary income plus a 10% penalty on that. So just be cognizant of that. Some people like to use their emergency or Roth as their emergency fund. Like I said earlier, I'm not a fan of that because if you put money into investments, you're going to have to pay a cost to do that. If the market's down and you take that money out, it might not be as much as you thought it would be after taxes and earnings, taxes and penalties on the earnings. So it's just don't use a Roth IRA as your emergency money. You can do what you want. You're an adult, but I wouldn't advise it. Moving on, you have a traditional 401k and a Roth 401k. These work just like a traditional IRA and a Roth 401k IRA. The two big differences is that you can put more money in. So in each one of these, you can put $17,500 in instead of the $5,500 limit. And this does not matter, or it does not matter how much you make in either one of these, as far as what you can contribute. Whereas the individual ones, there are caps and limits on how much you make. With a Roth 401k or traditional 401k, you can make $1 million and still contribute. The other thing that's different with these, your employer, based on the plan documents, can give a match. What I commonly see is a 3% match. You put in 3% of your check, they match 3%. If you don't put any money in, they don't match any. So it's based on your contributions. If you put in 6, they'll match up to 3. The highest one that I've ever seen was a 14% match, which I thought was phenomenal for one of my clients. But the typical rule of thumb is 3%. You put in 3%, they match it. You don't add any money to it, they won't. If you max it out, they're only going to put back up to 3% based on the plan documents. The other thing about these, typically you can't take it out unless you terminate service with your previous employer. So typically you can't just take it out because you need it. Sometimes they do loans, which they charge you interest on. But if you had an emergency, sometimes you can't just take it out, pay taxes and penalty. They don't let you do that. Now you have to look at your plan documents to see what they offer, but that's typically what I see. Moving on, we're talking about a SEP IRA. A SEP IRA is for someone who is a small business owner that is self-employed, that works by alone. Maybe he has one employee, maybe two, but typically you're working by yourself. You're an entrepreneur, you do contract work, but you get a 1099. A SEP works like a traditional IRA and a traditional 401k in the sense that it grows tax deferred. You take it out at 59.5, you pay taxes on it at that point. Anytime between now and then, if you take it out, you pay taxes and a 10% penalty for taking it out early. A SEP allows you to put back 25% of your income or $52,000 a year based on 2014 law, whatever the lesser of the two is. So let's say you make $100,000, you could put back $25,000 a year into a self-employed pension IRA. And this is for people that you can put more than $5,500. You want to put as much as you can to help with taxes. This is for the person that has their own business that doesn't have a lot of employees, like I mentioned earlier. And it's a great avenue to go if you're looking to put back chunks of money. Now, a simple IRA is the next one we're talking about. That's for business owners that have a few employees. They don't want to do a traditional or Roth 401k just because they don't want to put as much into the plan. Also, there's a little bit more expenses with those type of plans rather than a simple plan. The main reason is just third-party administrative paperwork in the way they calculate a few things. So a simple plan allows the employer to do a match up to 3% if they like, or they could do a non-elective contribution that says whether my employees put money in or not, I'm giving them a 1, 2, or 3% match no matter what. I do not see that often. Most of the ones I see, it's if employees put money in, the employer will match it. Now some do put just a solid 2% no matter what, but most of the ones I see, they do it if the employee puts in, they'll match it up to 3%. The limits on these, I believe, are 14.5 as far as what you can put in. They work just like a traditional IRA. You put money in, it grows tax deferred. Whenever you go to retire, then you pay your ordinary income tax bracket or whatever that is at that point, no penalty. I will tell you though, these though are simple. If you take it out early, if you put in contributions, and it has not been over a 2-year period before you need that money, they will tax you heavily on this. You could be taxed at 25% penalty plus ordinary income. So it could be 55% loss just by taking the money out on a simple plan. So that goes back to having your emergency fund, having your debts paid off, and then investing, because you don't have to worry about that penalty. The last quick retirement plan we can look at is an Own OK plan, and this is for partnerships. Maybe you're in business with your brother or a family member. An Own OK allows you to do what's called a salary defer, like your 401k contribution, plus profit sharing. And so I have some clients. They work together. They do a salary defer of $17,500 each, so they max that out. But then a third party comes in and says, looking at your books, looking at all the numbers, you can still put in $30,000 for profit share. So that's what they do. And so this, depending on your situation, depending on how your corporate structure is for your business, there's several different options you can go. You could do a SEP, you could do an Own OK, you could do a simple, you could do a 401k. I'd say go back and talk to your financial planner, talk to your CPA of which one works best for you, and then you can make an informed decision of what accounts you want to open. Last but not least are single or joint accounts. These have no limits. You could put $1 million a month in, and you could put $100 a month in. These do not have any stipulations on when you can get your money. You can typically, when you sell an investment in the market, it takes 3 days to sell, but anytime after that, you get your money at any point. You pay taxes on the earnings and or dividends and interest as your account grows, depending on the investments that you do. The big one that you have to worry about taxes with a single or joint is capital gains taxes if you buy something and you make a gain in it. Based on current law, depending on what tax bracket, that varies. You have a short-term capital gain, that's ordinary income, which is anything less than 12 months. Anything over 12 months is capital gains. Typically 15 to 20% is what you're paying in a capital gain. You also have a capital loss. If you have a loss, you could write off up to $3,000 off your taxes and losses per year, and then the investment loss can carry over. But these accounts, you can put as much as or as little as you want in. There's no set time that you have to wait before. You don't have to pay any penalties on it. There are no penalties for taking it out early, except you have to worry about capital gains. And depending on the investment that you choose, there might be an underlying fee to take it out of that. But as far as tax-wise, you don't have an early distribution penalty like you would on the retirement accounts. Last but not least, we're going to talk about insurance. I hear this a lot. Isn't insurance a ripoff? Depends on what product you buy and who you buy it from. Unfortunately, life insurance products are sold, and then you never hear from your person that sold them again. I have clients that they bought a policy 20 years ago and been paying on it for 20 years. They haven't heard anything from their guy, and we look at it and we find out 5 years from now their policy is going to lapse and they're not going to have any death benefit for their wife or kids or their families. And so that's not a good conversation to have, and that's not a pleasant conversation I have to give to my clients, but we look at it to see what we can do. Depending on what product you buy, there's certain different types of life insurance. The most common is term insurance, whole life, and universal life. Myself, especially with the audience I'm talking to today, in your situation, term insurance I think is one of the best routes you can go. Term is a contract for a certain period of time. So let's say it's for 20 years. You pay a set amount every single month for the next 20 years. Doesn't go up, doesn't go down. It's a term contract that you sign. At the end of that 20 years, you don't have any more life insurance, and you don't pay that premium anymore. So, but the thing about term, it's very cheap, and especially based on your age now, you can get a lot of life insurance if you're doing term for a very cheap amount. My wife and I, well, me personally, I took out $1 million policy for my wife. Well, it's on me, but my wife gets it if I pass away. If she plots to kill me, she doesn't get any of it. But if I pass away in an accident, she gets $1 million. I pay $37.44 a month. That's it for $1 million. And that's good for the next 20 years. The reason why I like 20 years is within that period, you're going to get out of debt, you're going to have money in cash, you're going to build wealth, and by the end of the 20-year period, you're going to be financially established that you won't need insurance. And so I like 20 years because that's a long time horizon. That's a very long period. But also term is cheaper compared to whole life or universal life. Whole life and universal life, you pay 3 to 4 times the amount of a term policy. They say it's good to 100 years old or 90 or whatever they tell you when they sell it to you. But then when you've paid on it for 20, 25 years, then you look at the numbers, you realize that it's not good forever, and either you need to pay more in premiums or your policy goes away. And that's not a good conversation to have at that point, and I don't like having those, but that's what happens when you buy whole life or universal life. And I would say if you're thinking about life insurance, a good rule of thumb is to have 8 to 10 times your earned income. Now, depending on how much you owe in debt, that just depends. For me personally, we just owe the house. We owe $140,000 on the house. So if I had $500,000 in term insurance or life insurance, I would probably be okay. I mean, my wife pays off the house, and she has $350,000 to invest and use to whatever she needs it for. But I like 8 to 10 times because what I look at is, yes, she didn't pay off the mortgage, but then she needs time to find employment because I'm the breadwinner, so it might take her some more time. One, she's grieving my loss, so that takes some time. Also, with kids, I don't have any yet, but like I said earlier, we have our first one that's due in October. I want to be able to make sure that their daycare is covered because now my wife's working, so who's going to watch the kids? I know that's not cheap. What about college expenses? That's not cheap, and you know that because you went to McMurray University and you know what student loans look like. And so I want to make sure that all of those things are covered, and that's why I took out $1 million. Depending on how much you want to take out, that's up to you. That's your prerogative. There are all calculations that you could do with your planner or your financial advisor or on your own to see how much really you need. You might have too much right now. You might have already done life insurance. Somebody said, hey, you really need this, and you should set up for this, and these are the costs. Well, you might be overinsured, and you can dial that down a little bit and then put some more money in your pocket. And that goes back to another big deal with the term versus whole life or universal life. Those whole life and universal life policies are a lot more expensive. And if you do term, you could be pocketing the difference to pay off debt, pay off, build up your emergency fund, or put it in investments. Even if it's $50 to $100 a month difference, you're saving a lot. That's a lot of money over time with compound interest. So I would tell you that insurance is a necessity. Going on the next slide, I mean, is this really necessary? I think absolutely. You have to have it. And it's so cheap now based on your age that if something was to happen, it's covered. It covers you. And also with insurance and how cheap it is currently, you, you can take out a lot more than where it will be 20, 30 years from now, especially with Obamacare and different premiums going up. Right now is the time to get it while you're healthy, before maybe you have a health scare or something like that, because it's a lot harder to get it. It's a lot more expensive down the road. And the last thing is, you really don't want your loved ones having to deal with all your financial stuff and while they're mourning the loss of you. I mean, they need time to grieve, and by having that life insurance, having that money there. I mean, I've had widows that have come in, they haven't worked in 20 years, but their husband's had life insurance and they're taken care of for the rest of their lives, or they need time to find work, but they have enough money built up in life insurance to help them with that. So I hope all this stuff has helped. I would love the opportunity to help you in any way I can. Just look up my name in Midland under Financial Advising, and you'll find me. And if you have any questions after our presentations, if you need help and you want individual questions about your plan, or hey, you're in life insurance or you're in some product, feel free to give me a call. I got in the business to help you or help people. Doesn't matter if you have $5 million, you have $50. I want to be able to help you any way I can, and I'm pretty sure that we can do that if you give me a shout. But if you use me, I don't care who you use. I just want you to get out of debt. Make sure you have insurance covered. I know some people say, well, I don't have the money for that right now. If you went to Chili's this past weekend with your family, you probably spent more than what it would be for your term insurance. If you have cable package at your house, I'm pretty sure that's more expensive than what your insurance would be. So insurance needs to be a priority. But if you need help with any things we talked about tonight, if you have any general questions, feel free to give me a shout. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you being with us and reviewing this webinar. We're going to have many more to come, like I mentioned earlier. And have a blessed night.